Good afternoon. I think the participants are basically from Japan, right? Good afternoon is correct. Okay, I assume that. And my name is Shinjo Fujimori. I'm a professor at Kyoto University and moderator of today's meeting. And today we have a presenter, Sarita Vishwanathan, who is also appointed assistant professor at Kyoto University, working on national scenarios. And she's mainly in charge of international association working group as a national scenario, which aims to compile the national scenarios worldwide beyond the Japanese scenarios. And yeah, so today she will be talking about the ongoing process of the national scenarios, and perhaps it might give you some inspiration of how to interpret the Japanese national scenarios, and beyond that, there'll be, I think, interesting conversation among us. So yes, now floor is yours, Sarita. You can start your presentation.
Yeah. Thank you, Shinichiro. A very good afternoon to everyone who's present online, and thank you very much for this opportunity. So here I would first give the background of the IMC, which is the Integrated Assessment Modeling Consortium. Before that, I would like to thank, first of all, my co-chairs, Professor Shinichiro Fujimori from Kyoto University and Professor Roberto Schaefer, who are the co-chairs of this scientific working group. And from the modeling teams, all the modeling teams who have registered and submitted their scenarios for vetting process, I have Anuj, who is a PhD candidate at Kyoto University, and Shoaib, who's a research associate in IMA. And from a IASA registration perspective, Philip and David. So I'd like to acknowledge them for all the work that I've done till now. What I'll do is present you a basic background of the IMC and the processes in IMC, then inform you about the open call and the processes that we are going through for national scenarios, and which is currently underway. And if you have any further questions, obviously we'll try to address it at the end of this session, and you can always email me. About IMC, so IMC is the Integrated Assessment Modeling Consortium, which was founded in 2007 to facilitate and foster development of integrated assessment models and conduct research employing the IAMs like model diagnostic, intercomparison, and coordinated studies. They also basically conduct studies in climate modeling, impact, adaptation, and vulnerability. We have about more than 75 members now from 30 countries across 4 continents. Under the IMC, we have various scientific working groups which have been established over the years. So currently we have 5 working groups, which include the working group on scenarios that has helped develop the SSPs, the shared socioeconomic pathways. Then we have a working group on data protocol and management and evaluation and diagnostics, which look at the scenario database, the evidence, the model diagnostics and stuff like that. And latest we've had, I think under AR6, we had the scientific working group on climate finance, which looks at the climate finance aspect of all the mitigation efforts, climate impact efforts. And in 2021, Professor Shinichiro Fujimori founded the newest scientific working group on national scenarios. These scientific working groups have a meeting almost every year. This last year, the meeting was held in Seoul, South Korea at Yonsei University. We basically encourage researchers across the world to submit abstract. We have some 15 to 18 sessions. Last year, we had 384 participants, out of which 300 were participated in person and 83 online, representing from 37 countries. We have a YouTube channel, which basically has recordings of all the presentations, I think, from the past 5 years. And this year, the IMC 25 will be held in Brazil. So please stay tuned. You can basically type in IMC annual meetings and you will get this information. Now, with the background, I would try to give a context about our work. So in IPCC AR6, it was mentioned when it came to national scenarios, there's a broad literature on global mitigation, but just a decent literature when it comes to country level pathways. And in the last decade, across board, so in the North America, specifically Latin America, Europe, and Asia, there have been teams that have been developing national pathways almost every couple of years, 3 to 4 years. What is observed is different methods and models exist to analyze the current policies and NDCs at country level. And the country level studies differ across different dimensions. So these include, they will differ like single to multiple sectors, emission coverage. Most of the studies only cover CO2. It is very difficult to find country pathways covering GHG emissions. The type of scenarios will be different, but mostly national pathways are policy-oriented scenarios. And what is the policy coverage? Is it 5 key policies, 10 key policies, or 250 across countries that have been observed to differ? When it comes to peer-reviewed literature, at a country level, there's a lot of peer-reviewed literature. Fujimori basically had a concept in Nature Climate Change where he talked about having model intercomparison at a national level. From a national scenarios perspective, we have UNEP gap report, which basically captures the G20, mainly the G20 countries in terms of the emission gap report. We have the World Bank that looks into the low and middle income economies, so they may not have a modeling tool, but there's an Excel tool they use to show their carbon resident neutral growth. And then we have the IEA, which is published every year. And so USA has a legacy of having national scenarios being developed since the last 40 years. In the last decade, we've had climate and energy modeling forums being founded in various countries, which include Europe, Germany, Japan, Korea, China, and India. And across board, when you ask, you get to know that there are many modeling teams, but only a few of them generally address the policies at a national level and may be helping the government to establish their climate policies, the country climate policies. Keeping this in mind, the IMC SWG was created in 2021 because no communities or organization were there for national scenarios. They were developed across multiple national and international projects. So there was a need to collect this information at one location. We could do comparability of the scenarios. However, how do we map the global picture, understanding this national perspective? And there was a need to tackle the uncertainties with climate policies being revised and launched frequently. National circumstances are changing, as you could see, the case of US most recently. And then global scenarios are also revised based on the Working Group 3 and Working Group 1 state-of-art knowledge. So IMC SWG on national scenarios provides a required platform to explore this national climate action. Keeping this in mind, we had 5 objectives. One is to promote standardization of national scenario development, to increase the comparability and use of assessment, interlinking the national and global activities, providing a platform to share best practices, facilitate and support dialogue between the IMC community and the national scenario users, such as policymakers, non-state actors, and so on, and coordinating the archiving, documentation, and communication of national scenario data and its publication. Initially, when I did the literature review, I found that IPCC had the global models, national scenario downscale, but there were 50 models that they had noted. But other than that, there are more than 100 models that are out there when it comes to literature. And I am guessing more than 150 models. We need to collect all this. And what I also observed is the modeling networks like AIM, that is the Asia Pacific Integrated Modeling Network, GCAM, IMACLAIM, MessageIX, these modeling networks times are very well known, and they customize the models at a national level across board. Keeping this in mind, we had an open call last year, which kind of started collecting scenarios last March. We were building on the work that was compiled by the IPCC AR6 Chapter 4 on mitigation and development pathways. We plan to evaluate the gap between the current policies implemented and the measures to reach net zero at national level. The main objectives of this exercise, as informed, was to consolidate all modeling exercises across the world, facilitate the discussion of national scenarios, and then see alignment of this LTS and net zero with the short term, and do we need update of the NDC. To keep it really simple, because we do not know which kind of modeling teams would come aboard, would they be fully developed modeling teams? So there would understanding that there would be different degrees of development across the models and the teams that would be submitting. We kept it very simple and requested just the teams to submit BAU current policies net zero, at least 2 scenarios they need to submit. So we can kind of analyze that initial data, vet the initial data with historic, but it is not necessary. It's just to get them, one, registered to the YASA database, two, understand how submission process works. Because during stakeholder engagement, one of the things we learned was submitting the scenarios to a national, international database like YASA was also a huge barrier for many of the national teams. The initial process set of variables was shared with the national teams who were already registered. I apologize for the background noise. The compilation of national models and scenario data was done on YASA's website, which there is a YASA database there. And then there was a vetting of scenarios also done, which is not mandatory, but we did it because there will be a process if we further submit it to the IPCC AR7 database or any other database for further publication. This is just to show you a progress that obviously we started the survey and everything in December of 2023, but we started registering and submission of all the scenarios last March. And in the past year, we've had almost 98 teams who have shown interest, of which we have almost in the process of registering the 90 teams. So one by one, we'll also submit the other, we'll register the teams in place. Of this 70 registrations that have been completed, 40 have actually submitted as of the 28th February. So my guess is in this month, we will have at least 4 to 5 more teams submitting their scenarios for sure, because they have been. So once their model is registered, they'll be submitting. And the good part is initially in November, we did not have Indonesia on board. We did not have UK team on board. And now we have all these teams on board, and surprising teams like Ecuador and Ukraine, who can basically, there's a team in US who can give a scenario for Ukraine is on board. So that's very interesting. When we did the surveys, just to make everyone understand, like 84% of the teams that were interested to be part of this exercise. When we asked about their awareness of YASA database and the IMC template that we shared, 51% were aware of the IMC template, but more than 50%, 57% had not yet registered to the YASA database. When it comes to emission profile, most of the teams were able to submit CO2. Modeling types differed across board. There are IAMs, national IAMs, soft link IAMs. A lot of them are energy system models, especially the ones who have submitted are energy system models. we have CG models, and we have sectoral models. And also observed is majority of the teams are part of large network, modeling network groups such as AIM, GCAM, Times, IMACLEM, MessageIX, and so on. I think power systems, there is a OASIS or something like that also. So from a scenario submission, initially, when we had asked the survey, almost 40% said they'll submit the preliminary, but many of them said they will submit the peer-reviewed or grey literature scenarios. I am very happy to inform that all the submissions are preliminary submissions, which is good. When it came to scenarios, most teams have submitted 3 scenarios, but some teams have submitted 2 scenarios. This could be BAU net zero or CPS net zero, but most teams have submitted net zero scenarios. And from sectoral models, obviously it's dominated by energy supply, energy demand models. In the interest survey, almost 40% has showed that they could share the FLU based indicators, but when it came to submissions, we just have 4 models who have shared the FLU based indicators. This is just a map to show that the 90 teams across. So the blue are the ones that submitted, that have registered but not submitted. And I think the orange are the ones. So we have 20 countries that have submitted the submissions, like across 40 teams. When it came to emission coverage, so as you can see that net zero commitment, we have about 140 countries covering 88% of emission coverage. In G20, the G20 countries cover about 76% of the total emission coverage. How we have registered, we can get about 73% with about 32 countries. But if we take regions into consideration, so EU as a region, we have at least 6 teams which have EU-based submissions and 1 team which has Southeast Asia-based submissions, then we can cover over 80% of these emissions. And the current submissions with 19 or 20 countries, it's around 60 to 67%. Just to show, obviously we faced a lot of issues where at the back end, so registration itself, teams had multiple accounts because they worked on across multiple projects. So one thing we did is streamline the entire process. So the team is registered once on the YASA database, and then they can basically have the same account across multiple projects. So it's easier to transfer data if they're part of multiple projects. When it came to submission of the scenario variables, there were a lot of issues, and we did QC checks and we got back to the teams as much as possible. And today I can say that I've got back to all the teams and at least tried to address most of the issues, because the back-end processes are still work in progress. In the initial note, sometimes the teams may not understand what the issue at hand was. So we had to get back to the YASA team to understand. And then I was able to address most of the issues in their scenario template. When we had the IMC meeting last year, there was also a couple of information that was said about the units, about having more indicators added. Teams wanted more net zero scenarios to be added. Currently, we are just requesting 1 net zero scenario. So they would want to basically share multiple net zero scenarios. Also, the common definitions are changing. So YASA recently updated its common definition. So we need to be updated on that account as well. Timing of the collection also mattered. So right now for this month will be the last month to submit the final scenarios. This process will be a continuing process. So the final scenarios are for a paper publication. So we need to set that deadline. But we have another synthesis report coming up. So in case you are interested, please let me know. We will register your model and have the scenarios for the synthesis report. And from EU region, there was another specific EU 27 versus EU 28. So having UK on board would be as a separate modeling team would be really helpful to just do the checks. When it came to vetting process, what we understood in the entire thing was this is a national process. We are just getting organized versus the global process, which is already organized for the past 2 decades. So it's easier for them to have certain vetting processes in line because they are aware of the international databases and they know historically where the checks need to be. But in case of national, what we have also understood is in these national processes, many of the national teams may have used a national database, and a national database could have a different reference than the international database. So we need to basically get back to the teams, at least historical checks of emissions and energy, that these are numbers that may not match. And here we have focused only on historical and baseline. We are not looking at projections because the country policies could be weak or very strong or very ambitious, which could be feasible or infeasible. We do not know. So we do not want to do that check and basically reject a scenario. Currently, we are rejecting no scenarios. It's not very strict criteria. It is just to basically capacity build and inform and make teams aware that there is this process that is going on. So for submission process, we have to check which is the minimum variables of the list of 180 variables that have been submitted to them. What have these teams submitted? So this is just an example to show of all the teams. One can basically see that population and GDP, which are the main socioeconomic parameters generally used, some teams have not submitted. So we have to go back to the team and inform that they have to submit these variables. When it comes to emissions, again, one can see that various kinds of emissions, it's emission, CO2, and energy that has been submitted. But no one has submitted the energy and industrial. Very few teams have submitted that when it comes to. And this is one of the vetting variables in the global processes. So those are certain things where we can inform the global processes saying that not every national team is able to submit that, and we have to change it to a CO2 or an energy vetting variable. As you can see, most of the teams are energy systems models, so they have submitted energy-based variables. However, for FLU, we had just 4 teams out of the 40 teams that have submitted the variables. So here, what I wanted to show you was the change from the IPCC and other processes that we did when it came to historical checks. So here we just are looking at CO2 emissions, which was not included. And we may look at the CH4, but it is not mandatory under our processes. For energy in IPCC, they included primary energy, nuclear, secondary energy, nuclear, and renewables. But we have to basically check the coal, oil, gas, historical checks. The threshold criteria is still, we are still discussing on how to go about it. Similarly, the future checks of historical or CCS currently for national scenarios is not checked as a vetting process. Generally, this is used for a feasibility concern or a sustainability concern based on past historical data. But for now, for national scenarios, we are not looking that into account. This is just an example to show these are the various national as well as in global teams that have downscaled for Japan. And one can see that there are a few teams, when we look at each of the variables, they may be out of the limits, the upper boundary limits or the lower boundary limits. Similarly, for India, you can see that for a certain variable, they are completely, so one could be just 25 to 30, that is feasible, then we can increase the boundary limit. But if it's a 75% change, then we will go back to the team and inform that, look, for this particular year, it's showing a red flag. Can you please check? Is it okay? Can you just check if your model is giving, because historically this is the data. And this is just like to show, instead of having red, green and red, we are trying to do yellow, because there are certain teams which may have not submitted the vetting variables. So initially in the code, the way they did it is vetting variables submitted or not submitted, it would fail the team for that particular year if they have not submitted. So here a yellow kind of shows that the wetting variable was not submitted. If the wetting variable was submitted, we can do a quick check and then say that the scenario is viable or vetted or not, validated or not. When it comes to the study objectives, so our main purpose is to collect and generate an evidence base for national and international stakeholders. We would try to also basically aggregate these outputs to see where in the general emission gap report, like across global models of especially the main countries where we lie. Also, we will be checking the alignment of short-term NDCs to LTDs because the NDC update would be done this year. And then to identify the common and different aspects across models and scenarios at country level. This is just an illustrative of the 40 teams that have submitted representing the 20 countries. So you can see that there are teams that have submitted BAU, CPS, and net zero, but some teams have just submitted 2 scenarios, which is okay. At least we have a reference to check. And this is by modeling teams, how they have submitted. So just an example. What was observed is the time frame of submissions across team has varied. So from 2000, 2005, and then to 2030, or sometimes 2050, or sometimes 2100. So that has varied across models. The emission coverage has varied across models. So if we see emission CO2 or emission energy, we do not know if it is just for power systems, energy supply, or does it include energy demand. So hence the emission has varied. And then sectoral coverage has also varied. Some teams have shown all the sectors, some teams have not shown all the sectors. And generally, I mean, this is just to inform the teams that this is how different and diverse the data that has been provided to us is. So we are trying to see at least that 2015, 2020 data is provided to us by the teams if possible. This is an example of upscaler aggregating at a national scenario level. And the black kind of shows the current data that we have aggregated. And one can see that for the same countries, so this is an aggregate of 8 countries, it kind of falls in the IPCC min and max net zero scenarios, the CPS and net zero scenarios. So we are very much like in line, so I think. Now, what is the result? So what would we do? Why have we done this process? So the first process is collecting all the scenarios together and having this data kind of vetted and validated if possible, analyzed. And we will try to submit it to like a publication and also develop a synthesis report by end of this year. Once the data is published, when the papers is published, we go back to the teams and ask if they're interested to publish their data on the YASA database. So we can have like a web page for this, or we can ask the teams if they're interested to participate in the UNEP gap report from a policy perspective or modeling scenarios perspective as an additional scenario, because there are 4 models that basically help contribute to the UNEP gap report. And then we have the Scenario Compass database, which is a new initiative that started last year, commenced last year. And obviously, as a whole, because the literature is out there, we'll try to see if we can have other kind of papers. So eventually have these references easily submitted to the IPCC AR7 process. But this is all based on the team's interests and how much, because this is an extra effort for the teams only if they're interested. And this data then can be used by various stakeholders, other modeling communities, analysts, policymakers, especially investments. Many of the investors at a national and international level are used, and then businesses and students, non-state actors and students. So just to summarize, so when we talk about objectives, when it comes to promotion or standardization to increase comparatively, now we have almost 98 plus national, global, subnational kind of teams coming together, representing more than 32 countries. So it's one of the largest I would say, exercises that is taking place when it comes to model intercomparison in the world. We have an IMC template with 180 variables, which would increase in the next phase, hopefully. And then vetting variables is still work in progress and discussion. And there was a change in reference data, emission reference data from EDGAR to PRIMAP, at least for the national scenarios. We are trying to interlink the national activities with global activities and trying to basically develop, if the teams are interested, to be part of Scenario Compass, UNEP-GAP, and GFS was the network for greening the financial systems. So if we become more robust in the next few years, they will be interested to get information from the national scenarios and work with us on that. When it comes to building a platform for sharing practices, so we've had webinars in place across board, across countries. This is one such place where we do webinars. We inform that this is something that's going on. If you're interested in any way, please let us know. And if you would like to participate in this exercise, please, you're both welcome. Additionally, last year during IMC in November 2024, we have started a new survey on national sectoral submissions. So you have an economy-wide net zero, but many of the countries now are having sectoral net zero submissions. So I think the national sectoral scenarios also will become really relevant are relevant, and at least at an international level will be very, very important. When it comes to facilitating and supporting the dialogue, we are already doing it through the IMC. We've already given feedback to a few teams, and then there's work in progress with other teams across in the next couple of months. In terms of the archiving and documentation and everything, so teams have been registered. We are preparing documents, at least for the methodology part of these exercises. And then there have been discussions with the journals for paper publication. So once it's done, we can try to see if we can submit in the best journals. And we'll definitely also have a synthesis report, which was one of the feedback during the discussions. So I think this is kind of the timeline that we have for it, and the national sectoral survey. So if anyone is interested, they can get in touch. So thank you very much for your time and consideration. I look forward to the questions. Thank you.
Right. Thank you very much, Sarita. Okay, so we can get any comments or questions via chat box function. So if you have, please write down into that. While getting others, we've already gotten one question. Three questions from one person. Let me read one by one. So the first one is, are national scenarios typically energy focused, or do they comprehensively integrate land use, industrial transformation, and socioeconomic variables?
So till now, most models, it's economy-wide national scenarios with, I think, power systems, maybe industry and transport focus. Only 4 models, and out of these 4 models, 2 are specifically AFLU-based, but a couple of the Brazilian models are entire. So it's not only energy systems, but they have also provided the AFLU-based indicators as well. And I think for India also, in the next round, we will have energy as well as AFLU systems-based model submission. So these 2, I'm pretty sure. Indonesia is another country. China have to get back if they can have. So there are certain places where I know that AFLU-based emissions play a very important role. And if I know a modeling team, I'm trying to get back to them and say if they can at least submit a few important indicators, AFLU-based indicators, which would help.
What are Japanese scenarios?
No, I don't think any of the Japanese scenarios have it.
Well, perhaps from A, the land use would be included.
Yeah. So we have AIM Thailand, and then I think AIM Vietnam.
And
the blues.
you have
Yeah.
have Japan.
Yeah, so Japan, so you have the AIM hub Japan, but we don't have the agriculture.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Interesting. Why they are missing? Although we are usually reporting them, but
Yeah.
anyway, let's see. Yeah, we should have a closer look at the submission data. Okay, but for Japan, I think the share of the non-CO2 emission is relatively lower than the other countries. So the relevance of agriculture and land use to this total greenhouse gas emissions would be relatively low. But again, yeah, let's see.
Basically, hence I'm trying the other countries. Like I know, for example, US is there, so China is another country, India is another country. So getting at least from the main countries where you know that non-GHG emissions, the methane and nitrous emissions play a huge role. So I'm trying to at least get those countries to submit, even if a few data, if they could submit, that would be really.
Okay, right. Moving on to the second question. Are there efforts to integrate social sciences like behavioral economics, political science into scenario modeling beyond purely economic and technological projections?
Currently, in the initial exercises, maybe not, because we are still organizing ourselves and we don't have models that look into the behavioral economics. But definitely when it comes to engagement, it would be better, like it would be interesting to engage with them, I think. But yeah, currently in the current set of exercises for the next couple of years, we don't have that plan because it's more of a scenario data collection, and the variables are more quantitative based. However, I completely agree with the point and the question that has been asked. But in the current scenario, it is not taken into consideration.
Yeah, in general, I think it is still very rare to have social sciences in the scenarios, quantitative scenarios, right?
Yeah.
In general, generally speaking. And
Yes.
but yeah, Sugiyama-san often mentioned that we should incorporate that, and perhaps that would be one of the advancement in the next couple of years in this
Yes.
research field. So
Yeah.
I do very much look forward
Yes.
to incorporate those, perhaps in the next round or
Yes.
later.
Yes. So I think from like obviously lifestyle, consumption, demand. So mostly it would be energy demand side. So initially it may be narratives in the form of narratives and in the form of the demand side kind of indicators. It may not be as comprehensive, but for nationals, that could be the starting point, which can be done in the next couple of years. I agree with you.
Okay. The third question is, do certain regions face greater challenges in scenario development due to resource constraints or political barriers?
So what I've observed across while talking to many of these during my stakeholder engagement and many of these modeling teams is, if the modeling team is already developing scenarios, it is easy for them to submit the scenarios. In the case of Brazil in the past, because we've worked in many national level intercomparison, is if the political scenario is not favorable, because there is a team, they will still basically be developing scenarios as an academic process, part of a national project or an international project. So scenario development, submission, if there is a team, not an issue. In the case of Africa, there's a lot of capacity building that is being done currently. In the last 5 years, it has increased. So there are certain teams in place which are there. I think it's once a capacity is being built, it's maintaining the capacity for model development and model submission that becomes an issue. The other issue is all these teams across the world, depending on who they are, this is a more of a voluntary exercise. So it is not something that they have to mandatorily do. But I have been very surprised, and I'm very thankful to all the teams for taking out the time. They have been very patient with us and have submitted their scenarios and are very interested to be part of this project. So yes, it has been a slow process because going back to the teams, I'm the only one going back to the teams, trying to solve the errors and everything. But hopefully now, at least in the next couple of months, we'll have certain results, and I'm assuming that will scale up the entire exercise. So from a teams, if the scenarios is prepared, there's a little bit of time they have to take to change the results to reporting template. But once that is done, they have an idea, that is okay. When it comes to capacity building, it would be a longer process. And yeah, till now, the teams, it is not about the teams who have shown interest are modeling teams which are kind of established or newly established and aware of the entire scenario process and all.
Yeah, thank you. So probably the main constraint to submit the scenario is just a modeling capacity. If there is a person who can work on models, then basically, it's possible to provide scenarios. And I didn't see so much something like political barriers, the government constraints you to submit.
Yeah. Currently, we've not had any kind of political barriers from submission. And it's the main modeler who actually runs the scenarios who have submitted from all the 40 teams, actually, except, all the 40 teams. Yeah.
Okay. We have another questions. So is it okay to register scenario model which was published only in grade journal so far? What would be the minimum requirement?
The minimum requirement is hopefully if you have a model, you have a model document, and gray literature is okay. Obviously, peer-reviewed literature would be great, but even if it's gray literature, we are fine because these are national scenarios. So there are many teams which just develop and submit to the government. And for government, sometimes you may not have peer-reviewed literature. You may end up writing a report, which could be internal report. And only sometimes I've seen in the case of India and other developing countries, you could make it external report, but it is kind of, so we understand that there may be gray literature. But yeah, we will do the internal validation when it comes to historical checks and everything. So yeah, the main criteria is hopefully if you have a model, please have a specific model document that is there for that model. So if someone wants to check online, they can go back, because we also are trying to see if we can link it to the IMC wiki and have these models, if they are good models, to be registered also simultaneously. So if you have a model document, that makes the work easier.
Yeah. So for the submission, there's no strong barriers, and if you have an interest, just register and submit. But at the end, when we write a paper, there might be some data checks like consistency among the variables, or consistency with the historical statistics, and in some cases, there will be some requests to revise from such kind of perspective. But basically, the principle of this working group is to be inclusive as much as possible. And if you're going to set a high hurdle, then I can imagine that many developing countries, modelers, give up to join. And this is not purely scientific. It's not purely aiming to make a scientific academic achievement, but obviously it's closely interlinked with capacity building activity to cultivate this international research field. And so we are basically trying to encourage to submit as much as possible if you have something relevant to this kind of scenario works. Yeah, another one. Global IAMs resolve many countries. Have you seen any differences between national scenarios from global models and national results from national models?
Yes. So when we were doing the validation checks, the global downscaling for many countries, there have been, for each indicators, there has been, for emissions, I think it's in the range. But when we look at each of the wetting indicators, there has been differences. So it falls above or below the range. So we have seen that. So right now, our focus is just national models, national scenarios. I think the next step for us would be comparing these national scenarios with global downscale scenarios. So that would be another interesting paper to do.
Okay, then I have another question on the data accessibility. What are the most significant data gaps when developing national scenarios, and how do different modeling teams address these gaps?
So I have not gone to each of the teams or discussed when it comes to data gaps, how they have addressed it. So that is something I know from personal experience talking to national teams. But in this SWG, all we've done is data collection and work with the teams to request them to submit at least the data, that is the emission data, primary energy data, secondary energy data, if possible sectoral primary energy data, final energy data, if they can submit. This was the easiest to do, because if we give them overwhelming 300 or 3000 variables, the teams, it could intimidate the teams. From a personal experience, in a developing country, getting historical data becomes very difficult. So you can get time series historical data becomes very difficult. Emission data now you can get because you have the national communications, BUR, BTR to compare when you're a modeling team. Getting the energy data, the primary energy data to compare it with at a national level. International level, there's already a data present, but at a national level, it becomes really difficult. So if you want to do a national level data to advise the government at a national level, there is that data gap when you're doing scenarios. So that is something we have observed in the past. And then obviously one is the economy wide, the other is macro micro. So if you want to look at equity issues, the income data is very difficult to find. So those are certain things. If you go into data, there are various data depending on the models that you need, which can be difficult depending on the country. Especially, and this is the case of developing countries. Developed countries, I think most countries do have the data that is required.
Okay, that's all what I have now in the chat box. But are there any other questions or comments? While waiting. could we talk a little bit on Japanese scenarios and status and relative positions? Like, I think Japan teams have submitted quite good scenarios, basically, right?
Yes, and they have also updated, some teams have also updated their scenarios because last year they had submitted. So there's the JMIP exercise that is going on. So once that was updated, I think Masa also helped that they need to update the scenarios. So that helps. One is that if you submit to the JMIP database, the YASA team can easily select the variables and then shift it to the national SWG. So one of the things would be if FLU based scenario variables are not selected, I can go back to the YASA teams if the JMIP has this agriculture based, just to request them and double check are these variables there, and that is something that can be done easily. The second, similarly, I think Japan, India is another team set I'm trying to get a lot of. China, I'm trying to get back to the teams. They have registered, but there are teams who have not submitted. So it's basically going back to the teams and saying if they can submit the data for the exercise. So
yeah. So I think Japan has a great history in energy modeling, where I think probably over the last 20 years or 30 years, we already had an experiences. And so, based on that, our current generation models are standing and playing around in this international community. And so I greatly appreciate the past efforts. And also, I would like to remark that Sugiyama-san's effort, maybe around the last 10 years, he established a JMIP framework and collecting the modeling teams. And initially, I think we had many issues from the simple reporting back to communicating each other and etc. But now we have a sort of a community and a culture to have standard scenarios database, and which makes us very easy to join this international activity. So yeah,
I think the two teams, one is the US team, which is quite organized and they kind of regularly publish. But what is interesting is of all the 16 teams, we have just 2 or 3 who are submitting to this process because of time issues or commitment issues and everything. Japan is the most organized, like you have all the teams submitting all the data because of the JMIP process and because it's more recent. US, they don't have it on the YASA database, so that could be another reason. If they had the US MIP on YASA database, it would be easier to register as well as submit. And the other team is the European regional, the EU. It's not the countries in EU, but the EU has, I think, from a region perspective, they are much more organized. Everywhere else, I think it's just a starting process. So what I think Masa may have, as you basically informed, experience in the last 10 years, I think for all the other country modeling energy forums, we are experiencing that. So China also just published a couple of papers, are in the process. South Korea is in the process of publishing a paper. So everyone is still organizing, and then having those teams participate in the SWG, we are just pushing. So instead of having at least 5 teams, we have 2 to 3 teams from each of the countries. So that's a huge,
yeah. Okay, well, we have 3 to 4 minutes left, but if you don't have additional comments or questions, can I close now?